The painted arrows on the asphalt began pointing toward my car instead of forward. At first I thought it was just the angle of the headlights. The road was empty and straight, a narrow strip of black running through a stretch of low forest and farmland that had long since gone dark. My beams reached only so far before dissolving into a dull haze. The night beyond them felt thick and unmoving, as if the air itself had settled. The arrows were simple traffic markings, white triangles spaced along the center of the lane, pointing forward to guide drivers through a construction detour. I had followed them for the last 10 miles without thinking much about it. The kind of quiet drive where your mind drifts and the road becomes background noise. But one arrow looked wrong. It seemed angled slightly backward. I eased off the accelerator. The engine's steady hum softened, and in the sudden quiet I became aware of how still everything outside the car was. No wind moving the treetops, no distant traffic, not even insects. The arrow slid under my headlights. For a moment it looked normal. Then it rotated. Not physically, at least not in any way I could explain. The paint didn't peel or twist, but the shape of the arrow seemed to change its orientation relative to the road. The point that should have aimed forward now angled subtly toward the driver's side door. Toward me. I rolled over it before I could fully process what I'd seen. My tires made that familiar dry hiss on asphalt. The sound lingered longer than it should have, stretched thin beneath the car. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The arrow behind me was facing the wrong way. I slowed further, creeping along at maybe 15 miles an hour. Another arrow appeared ahead, pale under the headlights, pointed forward. I exhaled. Maybe I'd imagined it. Fatigue, bad lighting, the way painted lines distort when seen through a windshield at night. There were plenty of reasons. Still, I kept my speed low as the next arrow approached. The road itself looked strangely smooth tonight. Not freshly paved, just too uniform. The texture of the asphalt caught the headlights in a dull, granular shimmer that reminded me of wet sand, though it was completely dry. My tires rolled closer. The arrow held steady. Forward, forward, forward. Then, just before my bumper reached it, the arrow's tip shifted. A subtle pivot. Now it pointed slightly toward the car. I braked. The vehicle rocked gently to a stop. For a few seconds, nothing moved. The headlights washed the arrow in pale light, the white paint glowing against the black road. It was unmistakable now. The arrow was angled directly at the front of my car. I leaned forward in my seat. The engine idled softly, a low mechanical murmur that felt too loud in the silence. Beyond the windshield, the road stretched ahead into darkness. Behind me, more arrows sat faintly visible in the rearview mirror. I noticed something then. They weren't aligned anymore. Every arrow behind me had turned. Each one pointed toward my car. My chest tightened. I shifted the car into reverse without taking my eyes off the road. As the car rolled backward, the arrow ahead slowly rotated again. The tip tracked the car's movement. Not instantly, there was a delay like a compass needle correcting itself. But it followed. I stopped reversing. The arrow stopped moving. I drove forward again. The arrow pivoted once more, its painted tip turning until it aimed straight at the grille. I drove over it slowly. The sensation beneath the tires was strange. Not a bump exactly, but a subtle change in vibration, like the asphalt under that patch was thinner. In the rearview mirror, the arrow settled behind me, pointed at the car. I kept driving. The road curved slightly to the right, cutting between stands of tall pines. Their trunks passed through the edges of my headlights like dark pillars, but the branches above remained invisible. The canopy swallowed the light. Another arrow came into view. It already faced me. I slowed again. The arrow didn't wait this time. It was perfectly aligned with the center of my car, its tip aimed at the windshield as if marking a target. A faint sound reached my ears. Not outside, from the road itself. It was subtle, almost indistinguishable from the engine's vibration. A low, granular whisper that seemed to rise from the asphalt. I lowered the window an inch. Cold air slipped inside. The silence outside was immense. No wind, no leaves, no distant animals. just the quiet tick of the engine and that faint textured murmur beneath the tires, like countless tiny grains shifting against each other. I looked farther down the road. The next arrows were visible now, dozens of them, and they were all facing the same direction, toward me. My headlights swept across them as the car crept forward. Each white triangle glowed briefly, then slid beneath the bumper. Each one pointed at the car. The strange whispering vibration grew slightly stronger. Not louder, closer. The road ahead began to feel shorter than it should have been. The distance between arrows seemed compressed, as though the geometry of the asphalt had tightened around the car. I pressed the accelerator. The engine responded, but the landscape didn't move the way it should have. The trees passed more slowly than expected. The arrows came faster. Another detail emerged. They weren't just pointing anymore. They were adjusting. As the car drifted slightly within the lane, the arrows corrected their angles, each one turning a few degrees to maintain its aim. Every arrow on the road was tracking the vehicle. My mouth felt dry. I flicked the high beams on. The light shot farther down the road. The effect made my stomach drop. The arrows ahead were arranged in perfect alignment now, not along the lane, but across it. Rows of them, hundreds. Every arrow pointed toward the car's position, forming a converging field of white shapes that stretched into the distance like the spines of something enormous. And they were still moving, slowly, adjusting. The road was recalibrating. I accelerated harder. The engine rose to a tense, mechanical whine. The car surged forward, the arrows flashing beneath the chassis in rapid succession. But they kept turning. The entire stretch of road seemed to be aware of where the car was. Not the lane, not the direction of travel. The car itself. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The arrows behind me had shifted again. They weren't pointing at where the car had been. They were pointing at where it was now. Even from a distance. I realized then that the road wasn't just observing. It was calculating. The steering wheel felt oddly heavy in my hands. I drifted slightly toward the shoulder, and instantly the arrows ahead rotated, their white tips sliding across the asphalt until they converged on the new position. Like eyes adjusting, the whispering sound from the road deepened, the granular vibration turning almost rhythmic. The spacing between arrows tightened further. They were getting closer together. Too close. The road was narrowing. Or maybe the markings were multiplying. The headlights illuminated an impossible density of arrows now, overlapping fields of white triangles all pointing inward. At the car. The asphalt itself looked different too. The smooth black surface had developed faint ridges, subtle geometric lines that didn't match any normal road pattern. The texture reminded me of something organic, like muscle fibers beneath skin. The road flexed, not visibly, but the car felt it. A faint upward pressure, as though the asphalt beneath the tires had tensed. The arrows ahead formed a single, perfect line pointing directly at the hood. I slowed again. The car rolled to a stop. Every arrow on the visible stretch of road pointed straight at me. The headlights lit a long corridor of white shapes aimed at the car from every angle. Nothing moved. The engine idled quietly. Outside, the forest remained perfectly still. Then, very slowly, the arrow closest to the front bumper rotated a few more degrees. It wasn't pointing at the center of the car anymore. It was pointing at the driver's seat. At me. I sat frozen, hands resting on the steering wheel. One by one, the arrows farther down the road adjusted. Each pivot was small, precise, until the entire roadway, every painted triangle stretching into the darkness, was aligned not with the car, but with the exact spot where I sat behind the glass. The whispering vibration beneath the tires deepened into something like a breath. And for the first time since I'd stopped, the road in front of me began to move. Not the arrows, the asphalt itself. The black surface shifted forward by an inch. Then another. The arrows remained locked on my position as the road slowly, patiently advanced toward the car, like something enormous and deliberate drawing closer to examine what it had finally managed to find. A tunnel appeared ahead, but my GPS insisted I had already driven through it. The highway curved gently through the mountains, a narrow ribbon of asphalt swallowed by the night. I had been driving for hours alone, and the engine's low hum was the only constant. The forest flanking the road was still, dense and black, its shapes shifting at the edges of my headlights, then vanishing. Occasionally, a branch would scrape against the windshield, and I would startle, forgetting for a moment that I was alone. I glanced at the GPS mounted on the dash. Its screen glowed pale blue in the dark cabin, illuminating the curves of my hands on the wheel. I was supposed to be on a straight stretch for another 10 miles, but a new icon had appeared. A tunnel. The map was simple, almost schematic, but it marked the passage as if it already existed, as if I had already passed through it. I squinted, unsure if fatigue was playing tricks on me. The road ahead was empty, the headlights carving a narrow channel through the night. Then I saw it. The mouth of the tunnel, dark and yawning, cutting across the mountainside. I blinked. The GPS still insisted. Tunnel cleared. Distance to exit, 0.3 miles. I laughed quietly, a brittle sound in the silence. Already, I muttered, my voice sounding strange in the cabin. The car swallowed it. I slowed, the tires hissing lightly over the asphalt. The mouth of the tunnel grew, a black void against the gray of the mountainside, textured with damp stone and faint mineral streaks that glimmered under my headlights. It seemed ordinary, almost mundane, but the road reaching it felt stretched, wider than it should have been, longer. I hesitated. The GPS flickered, switching from the map view to the turn-by-turn. It announced, cheerfully, "You have cleared the tunnel. Continue straight." I gripped the wheel tighter, watching the black opening inch closer. My heart beat steadily, oddly calm. There was no fear yet, only the sensation that something was asking me to notice, to pay attention to a pattern my mind couldn't yet parse. I entered the tunnel. Immediately, the temperature changed. Not cold, not warm, just different. The air inside felt heavier, more viscous. My headlights reflected off the wet, uneven walls, making the space look longer than it should. The tunnel was straight, yet I couldn't see the end. My GPS, now silent, glowed with that same pale blue light, frozen on a screen that said, "Distance traveled, 0.3 miles." I glanced at the odometer. It agreed with the GPS. I had driven only a fraction of the tunnel's length. Then the first impossibility occurred. A small crack in the tunnel wall caught the light. At first, it was just stone, gray and dull. But then it seemed to pulse. Not visually, not like movement, but as if the texture itself breathed. My peripheral vision caught it multiple times, and each blink made the crack appear slightly closer, slightly larger. I shook my head. "I'm seeing things," I whispered, though the calmness of my own voice unsettled me. The car moved forward. The tunnel walls narrowed subtly, not abruptly but perceptibly. I could feel the air pressing in, soft but deliberate. The engine hum remained constant, but the vibration through the wheel felt different. Lighter, yet somehow heavier, as if the road beneath the asphalt was responding to my touch. I glanced at the GPS again. The map rotated slightly. The arrow representing my car flickered and shifted backward, then forward. According to it, I was leaving the tunnel I had supposedly already cleared, then re-entering it. A loop. I exhaled slowly. The tunnel lengthened impossibly. Every curve I remembered taking felt like it had been compressed, and yet expanded simultaneously. The geometry of the walls no longer obeyed expectation. A sound came next, soft, unplaceable, not echoing, not metallic, more like a whisper of air moving through rock. A vibration felt rather than heard. It drew my attention forward, toward the darkness. Then, unmistakably, the tunnel shifted. The exit, which I could see faintly in the distance, expanded slightly, then contracted. The walls subtly leaned, just enough that the light reflected differently. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, the exit looked closer, but the GPS insisted I had already passed it. I slowed. The whispering vibration persisted, traveling along the body of the car through the tires and frame. My hands clenched the steering wheel instinctively. I realized then that the tunnel wasn't just a passive space. It was aware of me, of my position, my orientation, my speed. I tried to remember what had been outside. The mountains, the curve of the road, the trees. But memory was thin, fragmented, like pages torn from a book. Every time I thought I remembered, the tunnel presented something slightly off, something that contradicted me. The walls flickered with subtle shadows, geometric, impossible. Triangles forming in the stone, barely perceptible. I tried to dismiss them as reflections of my headlights, but the shapes moved with intent. They rotated to face me, or at least aligned along lines that seemed directed toward my car. I reached for the GPS. The screen glowed more brightly now, as if noticing my hand. It showed a straight line, perfectly flat, but that line curved subtly on my windshield's reflection. My own eyes refused to reconcile the two images. I drove forward. The exit remained at the same distance, stubbornly, impossibly. And then I noticed the walls. Small depressions, tiny grooves in the stone, aligned in rows along the tunnel's length. They were subtle, almost invisible, yet their pattern repeated, stretching farther than I could see. And each depression seemed keyed to the car, where the tires pressed, where my headlights struck. They shifted imperceptibly as I passed. The tunnel was reacting. I considered stopping, but the car seemed heavier now, pressed into the road as if the asphalt itself held it. The whispering vibration rose again, this time in pulses, like the tunnel was breathing around me. I dared not glance backward. The GPS flickered, then displayed a new message. Tunnel cleared. You are on course. I felt my pulse in my throat. I'm still inside it, I muttered. My voice sounded far away. The walls leaned again, closer now. The exit ahead, when I looked, appeared impossibly narrow, almost too small for the car. Yet the GPS insisted there was nothing wrong. I drove on, cautious, pressing forward through the constriction. Then came the final impossibility. The light of the exit flickered, not from outside, but from within the tunnel itself. A pale glow emanated from the walls. The depressions aligned with my headlights, forming shapes I couldn't identify, yet felt uncomfortably familiar. They were like eyes waiting, patient. I slowed to a crawl. The car's vibrations changed. The tunnel seemed to inhale and exhale with each motion of the wheel. The exit shimmered, then stretched impossibly long, expanding forward, then backward, as though the tunnel measured time differently. I realized, with an unremarkable calm that chilled me more than panic ever could, that it didn't matter what I did. The tunnel knew where I was, always. It adjusted, it waited, it observed. I eased the car forward. The exit remained ahead, yet the GPS insisted I had passed it. The walls breathed faintly in the headlights, the stone pulsing in rhythm with the whispering vibration. And then I understood that the tunnel wasn't a place I could pass through. It was a presence, waiting, patient, mapping me, counting my pulse, my breath, my gaze. I glanced down at the GPS one last time. The map shimmered, then disappeared, leaving only a single white line. I followed it. The headlights hit the exit, and I could see the faint outline of the mountains beyond. But the walls still leaned, the depressions still tracked me, and the whispering, soft, steady, deliberate, continued, filling the space between the asphalt and the air. I pressed the accelerator. The tunnel moved with me,